It was supposed to be a perfect Saturday. The grill was fired up, the drinks were cold, and the lakefront view in our backyard made it feel like something out of a summer magazine. Friends and family had come over, music was playing, and everyone was just enjoying the sunshine. But of course, it didn't take long before things took a turn. And, like clockwork, she showed up. You probably already guessed who I'm talking about, the infamous HOA Karen. She's the type who treats the neighborhood like her personal kingdom, always looking for some rule to twist or a reason to call someone out. But this time, Shay didn't just yell from across the street or send one of her passive-aggressive letters. No, she sent people. Actual people. A small group of guys showed up uninvited and started causing problems. At first, I thought they were just random strangers, maybe confused or lost. But it quickly became clear they weren't here by accident. They started messing with our setup, pushing chairs, getting in people's faces, and claiming we were violating HOA guidelines. Mind you, we were in our own backyard by the lake, doing absolutely nothing wrong. It was the most bizarre thing I'd seen in a while. But here's the thing, I wasn't about to let this slide. And I wasn't alone. What they didn't count on was that I had already dealt with enough of Karen's antics to know my rights. So I made the call, and when the cops arrived, everything changed. Not only did they take my side, but they openly laughed at Karen's wild claims. You could see the look on her face, the mix of shock and rage when our whole plan backfired right in front of her. But trust me, that was only the beginning, because what came next? Let's just say, it turned the whole neighborhood upside down. Now, to really understand how things got to this point, you've got to know a little more about Karen and the history behind all this drama. She's not just some cranky neighbor. She's the self-proclaimed voice of the HOA, even though she wasn't officially elected to anything. She walks around with a clipboard, always watching people's houses like she's on patrol. If your trash can is out 5 minutes too long, she's on it. If your lawn is half an inch too high, she's writing it down. And if you dare have people over, she acts like you're throwing a wild concert. It's exhausting. The weird thing is, we used to be on decent terms. A wave here and there, small talk at the mailbox. But the moment I started having folks over on the weekends and enjoying the lake view, she flipped. I think part of it is jealousy. Our house sits right on the best stretch of lakefront in the neighborhood, and she's a few houses back with no direct access. Ever since we moved in, she's tried every trick to control what we do with our yard, saying no outdoor fires, no music, no unauthorized gatherings. Meanwhile, other neighbors throw parties all the time and never hear a word from her. What made this BBQ different is that I didn't just invite friends, I invited a few new neighbors too. Ones who've also had run-ins with Karen, so maybe she saw it as some kind of rebellion, forming against her little HOA kingdom. I wouldn't put it past her. But the fact she sent people, not security, not board members, but just random guys, to intimidate us. That's where it started to feel personal and honestly, a little scary. One of them even started recording with his phone, like they were trying to catch us doing something illegal. But the only thing they caught was the smell of burgers and people laughing. What Karen didn't know was that someone else at the party had already been filming long before they arrived, and that footage, it would end up changing everything. As the so-called enforcers stood around trying to act tough, you could feel the mood shift. The fun vibe of the BBQ started turning tense. People were whispering, some looked uncomfortable, and a few guests slowly started packing up. That was exactly what Karen wanted, to shut us down without even being there herself. But I wasn't about to let her win like that. I kept calm, offered one of the guys a soda just to throw them off, and asked politely who sent them. That's when one of them slipped up and said, "We're just doing what Karen asked." Boom. Caught. Right there. Meanwhile, my buddy Jake, who always brings his drone to film cool lake shots, had his camera running from earlier in the afternoon. It had been recording the entire scene, including these guys walking in from the street, not from a neighbor's house, and clearly causing a disturbance. So while they were busy accusing us of breaking HOA code, we were building a case of our own without them even realizing it. A few of the newer neighbors started speaking up too. One couple mentioned how Karen had harassed them for painting their front door a color she didn't like, even though it was fully approved by the actual HOA board. Another neighbor said she once called animal control on their dog for barking, even though the poor thing was inside all day. The stories just kept stacking up, started to feel less like one annoying neighbor and more like a pattern. A power trip that had gone way too far. But here's where things really got strange. One of the guys who came to mess with the BBQ, I noticed he kept glancing at his phone, like he was waiting for instructions. He wasn't just there to hang around. It looked like someone was feeding him live updates. And later, when we reviewed the drone footage closely, we spotted something shocking down the street. A parked car, engine running, with someone inside, watching. And that's when we realized this wasn't just about a BBQ. This was part of something bigger. The moment we noticed that car idling down the street, everything clicked. It wasn't just a coincidence. Whoever was inside had been there for a while, engine running, windows slightly down, but just enough to avoid being too obvious. At first, we thought it might be a nosy neighbor or someone waiting to pick someone up. But the longer we watched the footage, the more it became clear this person was keeping an eye on what was happening in our backyard. And guess what? The timing lined up exactly with when those guys showed up. Jake zoomed in on the footage, and though it was blurry, we caught a glimpse of a familiar hairstyle and sunglasses. It wasn't hard to guess. It was Karen, sitting in her car, hiding just far enough away to not be involved directly, but close enough to feel like she was controlling everything. That's when the whole thing felt less like an annoying HOA situation and more like a weird, small-town power game. People at the BBQ were still shaken. One of my guests, who used to work in property management, said he'd never seen anything like it. He pointed out that what Karen was doing could be considered harassment, especially if she wasn't acting on behalf of the HOA board officially. And from what we knew, she wasn't. A few of the board members weren't even aware of the incident until later, which made things even more suspicious. The police had already come, gone earlier, and they'd made it pretty clear we weren't breaking any rules. But now, with this new layer, people showing up under Karen's direction, her sitting in her car like she was running some operation, the stakes felt way higher. We all stood around the kitchen island, reviewing the footage again and again, wondering what to do next. Should we go to the board? Should we file a report? One thing was certain: Karen had crossed a line. But what we didn't know yet was that someone at the party had already shared the footage online, and by the next morning, everything would explode. By the time we woke up the next morning, everything had taken on a life of its own. What started as a backyard BBQ gone sideways had turned into a full-on neighborhood scandal. One of our guests, without telling anyone, had posted a short clip from the drone footage to a local community group on Facebook. The video didn't show anyone's face clearly, but it captured enough: the group of men walking onto private property, the confusion, and Karen's car lurking at the edge of the street. The caption: "When your HOA goes full spy mode to ruin your lakefront cookout." Within hours, it had blown up. Neighbors we barely knew started commenting, sharing their own stories. One said Karen had once banged on their door because their Halloween decorations were too scary for kids. Another mentioned she'd been snapping photos of someone's backyard during a birthday party. It was like everyone had been holding their breath for someone else to speak up first, and now the floodgates were open. But what really raised the stakes was a comment buried in the replies. Wait, didn't one of those guys used to work private security? That caught everyone's attention. A few people started doing their own digging. And sure enough, one of the men who showed up at our BBQ had a LinkedIn profile that listed private contractor under a now-defunct security company. That shifted the whole story. This wasn't just some neighbors being nosy. It looked like Karen had hired or at least convinced someone with a security background to intimidate us. Then came the biggest twist. One of the HOA board members, someone who'd always stayed quiet and neutral, reached out privately. They said this wasn't the first time Karen had taken things into her own hands, but it was the first time there was solid evidence. They asked if we could meet and that they had something we needed to see at that point. I wasn't sure if we were in the middle of a neighborhood feud or the start of something deeper. But one thing was clear: the Lakefront BBQ was just the spark. What we'd stumbled into was a fire ready to burn. Later that evening, I met with the HOA board member who had reached out. We sat down at a quiet corner table in a local cafe, and he looked more